A lion storms into the hospital, causing panic among staff and patients. When the nurse approaches the animal, she bursts into tears upon discovering the reason for its presence. The reason shocked everyone in the hospital. The storm was battering Chicago with unusual fury on that Thursday night. Sarah Miller adjusted the badge on her white uniform as she watched raindrops trickle down the window of Central Hospital. Her 15 years of experience as head nurse in the emergency department had never prepared her for what was about to happen. The emergency department was busier than usual due to the storm. Stretchers and wheelchairs moved through the white antiseptic corridors as the medical team worked tirelessly to attend to everyone. Sarah was finishing organizing patient files when Dr. Mark Thompson, the new veterinarian who occasionally provided services to the hospital, approached the central desk. "Busy night, huh?" commented Mark, running his hand through his graying hair. At 45, his experience with animals made him a respected reference in the city. Sarah nodded, but before she could respond, a deafening boom echoed through the main lobby. The automatic doors at the entrance violently swung open, letting in a gust of wind and rain. What happened next made everyone present freeze in their tracks. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us which city you're watching from and we'll continue. A full-grown lion with its mane soaked calmly walked through the hospital doors. However, it wasn't its majestic presence that was most shocking. Beside it walked a creature that defied any known classification. The being was approximately the size of a small bear, but its features were an impossible combination of different species. Iridescent scales covered part of its body, blending with soft fur in shades of dark blue. Its front paws resembled those of a primate, while its hind legs had retractable claws like a feline. The head was adorned with small luminescent protrusions, and its eyes, the most disconcerting aspect, were a deep green, revealing a disturbing intelligence. The initial panic was replaced by a stunned silence when everyone realized that the animals showed no signs of aggression. In fact, the lion seemed to be escorting the hybrid creature, which was limping slightly. "Doctor." Mark was the first to react, years of experience with wild animals guiding his instincts. With slow and calculated movements, he approached the unusual pair. To his surprise, the lion stepped back a few paces, as if making room for him to examine its companion. Sarah, overcoming her initial shock, joined the veterinarian. Her scientific mind was already working overtime, trying to catalog the impossible features of the creature. That's when she noticed something even more extraordinary. The being was holding something in its front paws, a metallic device the size of a tablet, covered with symbols and pulsating lights. "We need to take them to an isolated area," whispered Mark, his professional tone masking the incredulity of the situation. "Sarah, can you provide access to the old quarantine sector?" The nurse nodded, her mind already plotting routes through the least busy corridors of the hospital. As she coordinated the team to create a secure perimeter, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strangely familiar about this creature. It was as if each unique and impossible feature triggered an alarm in her memory, connecting her to memories she had long tried to forget. The lion and the creature docilely followed the indicated path, as if they perfectly understood the human's intentions. Upon reaching the quarantine sector, Sarah noticed that the hybrid creature was examining the environment with an almost scientific curiosity, its green eyes recording every detail of the space. It was during the initial examination that Sarah made a discovery that would change everything. While collecting a small tissue sample from the creature, which remained surprisingly cooperative during the procedure, she noticed an almost imperceptible mark at the base of its neck, a symbol she knew very well, as it was identical to the one her brother, Dr. Ethan Miller, used in his genetic experiments before his mysterious disappearance 3 years ago. The discovery made her heart race. Ethan, a brilliant geneticist whose theories on directed evolution were considered revolutionary by the scientific community, had disappeared without a trace during an expedition to the Amazon. Now before her was living proof that his work not only continued, but had progressed in ways that defied nature itself. While Dr. Mark performed a more detailed examination of the creature, which they began to call Rex, Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the symbol on its neck. Each line of the geometric design brought with it an avalanche of memories. Long conversations with Ethan about his theories, family dinners interrupted by his sudden scientific inspirations, The last phone call before his disappearance. "You won't believe what I've discovered, Sarah," Ethan had said in that last call, his voice overflowing with enthusiasm. "It's bigger than anything we imagined. It's going to change everything." Those were his last words before the silence that would last 3 years. Rex demonstrated a surprising understanding of the environment around him. When Dr. Mark tried to collect a blood sample, the creature voluntarily extended its paw, as if it understood the medical procedure. The lion, meanwhile, remained a silent guardian, its eyes attentive to every movement. "Sarah, you need to see this," called Mark, his voice betraying a mixture of amazement and concern. Under the microscope, Rex's blood sample revealed something extraordinary. Its cells seemed to be in constant transformation, adapting and evolving in real time. "This is impossible," murmured Sarah, adjusting the focus of the microscope. But it was exactly the kind of impossibility that her brother had always sought. Ethan had dedicated his life to the study of accelerated evolution, theorizing about ways to allow organisms to adapt rapidly to environmental changes. The device that Rex carried began to emit a soft glow, pulsing in a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat. The creature immediately turned its attention to the object, its luminescent protrusions synchronizing with the device's pulsing. It was at this moment that the first alarm signals sounded throughout the hospital. Through the windows of the quarantine sector, Sarah saw military vehicles surrounding the building. Men in tactical uniforms carrying advanced equipment began to position themselves at all exits. "We need to get Rex out of here," said Mark, his experience with animal protection coming to the fore. "Whatever he is, he can't fall into the wrong hands." Sarah agreed instantly. Something in her gut told her that this creature was the key to finding her brother, and she couldn't allow another mystery related to Ethan to slip through her fingers. "I know an exit through the maintenance tunnels," she whispered, already moving towards a side door. "They're old passages from the time of the hospital's construction. Few know of their existence." The sound of boots in the corridors was getting closer. Rex, once again demonstrating his extraordinary intelligence, silently followed Sarah, with the lion right behind. Dr. Mark brought up the rear of the group, carrying some samples and basic equipment with him. As they descended a poorly lit service staircase, Sarah couldn't help but notice how Rex manipulated the device in his paws with impressive dexterity. The creature seemed to be trying to communicate something through the object, its luminescent protrusions flashing in increasingly complex patterns. The group reached an underground corridor, its exposed brick walls telling stories of decades past. The air was damp and heavy, laden with the weight of history and the secrets those tunnels held. Sarah guided them through the subterranean maze, her mind divided between the immediate need for escape and the infinite questions that Rex represented. That's when something unexpected happened. The device in Rex's paws began to vibrate intensely, its lights increasing in intensity, until it created an energy field around the group. Sarah felt an invisible force pulling her, as if reality itself was distorting around them. The air became dense, charged with static electricity, and a blinding light enveloped them all. When the light finally dimmed and Sarah managed to open her eyes, the scene had changed completely. The dark tunnels of the hospital had disappeared, replaced by the dense vegetation of a tropical forest. The humid air of Chicago gave way to the suffocating heat and characteristic humidity of the Amazon. But there was something different, something deeply disturbing about this forest. The plants, the sounds, even the very air seemed altered, as if all of nature around them had undergone a fundamental transformation. The group remained motionless for a few moments, trying to process the drastic change in environment. The forest surrounding them seemed to have come out of a feverish dream, or a scientific nightmare. Trees with phosphorescent trunks rose dozens of meters above their heads, their leaves emanating a soft glow that created hypnotic patterns in the humid air. Flowers of impossible colors pulsated, as if they had their own heartbeats, and vines with reflective properties snaked between the branches, creating a natural kaleidoscope of light and movement. "This is impossible," murmured Dr. Mark, his professional veterinarian gaze automatically cataloging the biological anomalies surrounding them. These species shouldn't exist. Sarah, on the other hand, immediately recognized the signs. The alterations in the flora were consistent with her brother's theories about accelerated evolution and genetic adaptation. Ethan always talked about the potential to unlock dormant characteristics in species DNA, and now she was seeing the result of his theories taken to the extreme. Rex seemed strangely at ease in this altered environment. His luminescent protrusions pulsed in sync with the surrounding vegetation, as if he were communicating in a language that humans couldn't understand. The lion, however, remained alert, its natural instincts clearly disturbed by the anomalies in the environment. "We need to move," said Sarah, noticing that the sun, or what appeared to be the sun through the dense, modified canopy, was beginning to set. "I don't want to find out what kind of nocturnal creatures this place harbors." As they walked, trying to maintain a constant direction through the dense vegetation, they began to notice more disturbing details. Small beings, which seemed an impossible mixture of insects and birds, buzzed around them, their iridescent wings leaving trails of light in the air. Fungi growing on tree trunks changed color when touched, forming patterns that resembled complex codes. "Sarah, look at this," called Mark, pointing to a series of marks on the ground. They were footprints, but unlike anything he had ever seen in his years of veterinary practice. They seem evolutionary, as if the animal was transforming as it walked. Rex approached the marks, his behavior increasingly intriguing. The creature began to manipulate the device it carried, and the lights on its body intensified. Suddenly, a holographic projection appeared in the air, showing a sequence of symbols that seemed strangely familiar to Sarah. "These are Ethan's notes," she exclaimed, recognizing her brother's unique style of scientific notation. He used to use these symbols in his research notebooks. Before they could examine the projection more closely, a sound reverberated through the forest, something between a roar and a melody, which made the air itself vibrate. The surrounding vegetation reacted instantly, its colors changing in a wave of transformation that spread like ripples on a lake. The lion growled low, its fur bristling. Rex, in turn, seemed to recognize something in the sound. His protrusions began to pulse in a faster pattern, and he began to move purposefully in a specific direction. "I think he wants us to follow him," observed Mark, noticing how the creature occasionally stopped to check if they were keeping up. Sarah hesitated for only a moment. Each step in this altered forest took them deeper into a world that defied comprehension, but also brought them closer to the answers she had been seeking for 3 years. The device in Rex's possession, the mutations in the forest, the projected symbols, everything pointed to Ethan and his experiments. As they advanced, the vegetation began to change subtly. The trees seemed more organized, as if they had been deliberately modified following a specific pattern. Sarah noticed that some plants exhibited characteristics that resembled scientific equipment: leaves that functioned as natural solar panels, flowers that looked like biological antennas. "This isn't natural evolution," she murmured, touching one of the equipment plants. "Someone is directing these changes, shaping the very fabric of life." A sudden movement in the vegetation made them stop. Something large was moving among the trees, something that seemed to change shape as it moved. The lion positioned itself protectively in front of the group, while Rex frantically manipulated his device. The tension in the air was palpable as the mysterious form approached. To everyone's amazement, what emerged from the vegetation was a metallic structure covered with bioluminescent vines, a wall that seemed part of a larger installation, perfectly camouflaged in the altered forest. "It's a research facility," whispered Sarah, her eyes scanning the architectural lines that blended organically with the vegetation. "And I bet it's not abandoned." As if responding to her observation, a panel in the wall reacted to Rex's presence. Green lights ran through circuits that looked like technological veins, and a door materialized where there had only been smooth metal before. The device in Rex's paws pulsed in sync with the installation's circuits. "He has access," noted Mark, observing how the creature confidently approached the entrance, as if he'd been here before. Sarah felt her heart race. If Rex had access to this facility and carried the marks of Ethan's experiments, then perhaps her brother was closer than she imagined. The interior of the facility was a surprising fusion of advanced technology and modified biology. Corridors illuminated by phosphorescent fungi led to laboratories where cutting-edge equipment shared space with plants that seemed to be part of the experiments themselves. Organic computer screens, made of a material similar to leaves, displayed real-time data on the genetic changes occurring in the forest. It's as if someone had created an entire ecosystem to serve as a living laboratory. commented Mark, his voice mixing admiration and concern. Rex guided them purposefully through the corridors, his luminescent protrusions pulsing in increasingly complex patterns. The lion, still alert, stayed close to the group, its instincts clearly warning it about the unnatural nature of the environment. In one of the rooms, Sarah found something that made her heart stop, a lab coat hanging with the name Dr. Ethan Miller embroidered on the pocket. It was worn and faded, but unmistakably his. "Ethan was here," she murmured, holding the lab coat with trembling hands. "Maybe he still is." Before she could complete the thought, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. They weren't normal footsteps. They had a strange rhythm, as if whoever was approaching wasn't completely human. Rex immediately positioned himself in front of the group, his device emitting a more intense glow. The lion crouched, ready to act, but showed no signs of aggression, only expectation. A figure emerged from the shadows of the corridor, and Sarah felt the air escape from her lungs. It was a woman or something that had once been completely human. Her skin had a peculiar glow, like microscopic scales that reflected light, and her eyes were like Rex's, green and deep, revealing a modified intelligence. "Welcome to Project Evolution," said the woman, her voice carrying a not entirely human timbre. "I am Dr. Lisa Chen, Ethan's former colleague. And you," she smiled, her eyes fixed on Sarah, "are exactly who we've been waiting for." Sarah stepped forward, thousands of questions accumulating in her mind. But before she could verbalize them, Rex approached Lisa, and the device in his paws began to project a sequence of images in the air, images that showed the true purpose of Project Evolution and Ethan's role in it all. The projections revealed an ambitious plan, not just to modify existing species, but to create a new form of life capable of instantly adapting to environmental changes. It was Ethan's answer to the crises threatening the planet, but at what cost? The holographic projections continued to unfold in the air, showing years of research condensed into a sequence of disturbing images. Sarah watched, hypnotized, as the story of Project Evolution revealed itself before her eyes. Each new piece of information was like a piece of a puzzle she had been trying to solve for 3 years. Project Evolution began as an initiative to save endangered species, explained Lisa, her melodious voice echoing through the laboratory room. "Your brother developed a revolutionary genetic editing protocol, something that went far beyond traditional CRISPR. It was capable of rewriting DNA in real time, allowing organisms to instantly adapt to environmental changes." The images showed the first experiments: plants developing resistance to extreme droughts in a matter of days, fish adapting to drastic temperature changes in hours. It was every evolutionary biologist's dream come true. Dr. Mark observed the projections with deep professional fascination. "This explains the mutations we saw in the forest, but how do you maintain control over the changes? Accelerated evolution like this could easily get out of control." Lisa smiled, a gesture that seemed strangely unnatural on her modified face. "That was exactly Ethan's concern. He insisted that we needed safeguards, limits, but She paused, her green eyes shining intensely. "I saw the potential for something much greater." Rex moved restlessly, his luminescent protrusions pulsing at a faster rhythm. The device in his paws began to show new images, records of heated discussions between Ethan and Lisa, ethical debates about the limits of science, about how far they should go. "Ethan wanted to use the technology only for preservation," continued Lisa, walking around the room with fluid, almost feline movements. "But I realized we could do much more. Why just preserve species when we can perfect them? Why not create a new generation of living beings capable of surviving any adversity?" Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Is that why my brother disappeared? Because he disagreed with your methods?" Lisa stopped in front of an organic screen that showed real-time data of the mutations occurring in the forest. "Ethan didn't disappear, Sarah. He hid. He took the original Evolution Project protocol with him, trying to prevent me from continuing my research. But he didn't realize that I had already made my own version of the device." The images projected by Rex changed again, showing the moment when Lisa began her own experiments. The results were impressive and terrifying. Hybrid creatures like Rex, plants with collective consciousness, animals with capabilities beyond any known classification. "But why did Rex seek us out at the hospital?" questioned Mark, his scientific mind trying to connect all the pieces. "Because he's more than just an experiment," replied Lisa, approaching the creature with something that seemed almost maternal in her altered gaze. "Rex is living proof that we can transcend the limits of natural evolution. He has the ability not just to adapt, but to consciously choose his adaptations." Sarah observed the interaction between Lisa and Rex with growing concern. There was something in the way the scientist talked about transcending limits that deeply disturbed her. Her brother always said that science without ethics was a dangerous path. "And the modifications to yourself?" Sarah asked, finally addressing the obvious. "Was it voluntary?" Lisa's smile widened, revealing slightly sharpened teeth. "It was necessary. How could I lead the next stage of evolution without experiencing it myself? Your fears, Sarah, are merely reflections of an outdated mindset. Soon, everyone will see that this is the only path for the survival of our species." The lion, which had remained silent until then, emitted a low growl. Something in Lisa's voice had changed, becoming more intense, more predatory. The laboratory lights began to pulse in sync with Rex's protrusions, creating a hypnotic effect that made Sarah feel dizzy. The laboratory environment seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, as if the walls themselves were alive and responding to Lisa's emotions. The equipment plants pulsed in increasingly accelerated rhythms, and the organic displays exhibited sequences of data that seemed to dance frenetically on the screens. "Let me show you something," said Lisa, heading to a sealed compartment at the back of the room. With a smooth movement of her modified hand, the door opened, revealing a containment chamber filled with devices similar to the one Rex carried. "These are the codexes, the next generation of the directed evolution device that Ethan created." Sarah cautiously approached, noticing how each device emitted its own glow, as if they had distinct personalities. "How many are there?" "Enough to initiate change on a global scale," replied Lisa, her green eyes shining with disturbing intensity. "Imagine a world where we can instantly adapt any organism to climate changes, where we can create new species capable of surviving in extreme environments." Dr. Mark, who was examining the data on the organic screens, frowned. "But the data shows instabilities in the mutations. Some of the transformations are unpredictable, causing suffering in the organisms." "Necessary sacrifices for the greater good," interrupted Lisa, her voice assuming a more authoritative tone. "Natural evolution has always involved sacrifices. We're just accelerating the process." It was at this moment that a new projection emerged from Rex's device, showing images that Lisa clearly didn't expect to see. They were records of failed experiments, creatures in agony due to incompatible mutations, plants that became toxic to the entire ecosystem, organisms that lost control over their own transformations. "You're playing with forces you don't fully understand," a familiar voice echoed through the laboratory, making Sarah freeze. Ethan Miller emerged from a hidden door, his face more aged than 3 years ago, but his eyes maintaining the same determination that his sister remembered. "Ethan!" exclaimed Sarah, her heart racing at seeing the brother she had been looking for so long. Lisa didn't seem surprised by the appearance. "Finally come out of your hiding place, old friend. Come to see the success of what we started together." "Success?" Ethan gestured to the images still projected by Rex. "You call this success? Turning living beings into experiments without considering the suffering it causes? Creating mutations that can destroy entire ecosystems? Always so conservative, Ethan." Lisa smiled, her modified features contorting in an unsettling way. "That's why you'll never see the full picture. The evolution I propose isn't just about adaptation, it's about transcendence. And now that I have the perfected codexes, I can finally implement the changes on a large scale." Sarah observed the exchange between the two scientists, realizing that she was witnessing much more than an academic dispute. It was a clash between two radically different visions about the future of life on Earth. The air in the laboratory became even denser with the tension between the two scientists. Rex moved restlessly between them, his luminescent protrusions pulsing in a pattern that seemed to reflect the agitation of the moment. The lion remained close to Sarah and Mark, as if sensing that its protection would be necessary. "What you don't understand, Lisa," continued Ethan, cautiously approaching, "is that evolution isn't just about survival of the fittest, it's about balance, about the intricate web of relationships that keeps ecosystems functioning. Lisa moved through the laboratory with a supernatural grace, her fluid movements evidencing the modifications she had made to her own body. Balance? The world is collapsing, Ethan. Climate changes are destroying habitats faster than any species can naturally adapt. My approach is the only viable solution. Solution? Ethan pointed to one of the organic screens displaying real-time data. Your modifications are creating organisms that can't reproduce, species that become dependent on constant genetic adjustments to survive. This isn't evolution, it's genetic slavery. Sarah, observing the discussion, began to understand the true dimension of the conflict. Her brother hadn't simply disappeared, he had been trying to prevent a potentially catastrophic technology from being released into the world. Dr. Mark, who had been silently analyzing the data on the screens, intervened. These mutation patterns, they're exponential. Each new generation of modifications becomes more unstable than the previous one. Precisely, exclaimed Ethan. That's why I developed safety protocols in the original project. The technology was meant to be used only to help species adapt gradually, not to force radical transformations. Lisa laughed, a sound that echoed disturbingly through the laboratory. Safety protocols, limitations. You've always been too cautious, Ethan. That's why I had to continue without you. Rex is proof that I'm right. A perfectly adaptable creature, aware of its own transformations. As if responding to the comment, Rex approached Lisa, but there was something different in his behavior. His protrusions began to pulse in a pattern that Sarah had never seen before, and the device in his paws emitted a more intense glow. He's not your experiment, Lisa, Ethan said softly. Rex is the result of something that even you don't fully understand. The consciousness he developed, his capacity for choice. This goes beyond your modifications. Sarah noticed that the equipment plants around them were beginning to react strangely, their colors changing rapidly, as if they were responding to an invisible stimulus. The very air seemed charged with a different energy. You're wrong, Lisa said, her voice taking on an almost feverish tone. You're all wrong, I'll prove that my method is the only way. She moved towards the codex compartment, her movements now more predatory than graceful. Ethan visibly tensed. Lisa, think carefully about what you're about to do. If you activate all these devices at once, the impact on the genetic structures of the forest will be catastrophic. But Lisa no longer seemed to be listening. Her own genetic modifications appeared to be affecting her judgment, making her increasingly obsessive and unstable. She began typing commands on one of the organic panels, her modified hands moving with superhuman speed. The laboratory lights began to flicker erratically as Lisa continued entering commands into the panel. The codexes in the containment chamber pulsed in unison, creating a disturbing visual symphony. The air became charged with static electricity, making everyone's hair stand on end. Lisa, the energy levels are critical, warned Mark, his eyes fixed on the readings on the organic screens. The equipment plants weren't designed to withstand this overload. Sarah watched horrified as the living walls of the laboratory began to contort, responding to the energetic stress. The mutations were accelerating out of control, transforming the environment around them into something increasingly alien. Ethan ran to one of the secondary panels, his fingers flying over the controls. I need to activate the containment protocols before the mutations spread beyond the perimeter of the facility. It was at this moment that Rex did something extraordinary. The creature positioned itself in the center of the laboratory, its device beginning to emit an energy field that seemed to dialogue with the other codexes. Its luminescent protrusions pulsed in a complex pattern, as if it were executing some kind of protocol of its own. He's establishing a dialogue with the systems, exclaimed Ethan, amazed. Rex isn't just a result of the experiments. He's developed his own form of evolutionary consciousness. Lisa stopped her frantic commands, her modified green eyes fixed on Rex. Impossible. The level of autonomy he's demonstrating goes beyond anything we programmed. The lion, which until then had maintained a defensive posture, approached Rex, as if understanding that something crucial was happening. The two creatures seemed to be operating on their own wavelength, their presences creating a counterpoint to the growing chaos in the laboratory. Sarah felt a change in the air, something beyond the visible physical alterations. It was as if a new form of consciousness was emerging, something that transcended the barriers between species. "Ethan, what's happening?" "Rex is using the Codex in a way we never imagined possible," replied her brother, closely observing the data appearing on the screens. "He's not just adapting to the environment, he's helping the environment itself find a new balance." The equipment plants began to stabilize, their colors returning to a more harmonious pattern. The other codexes in the containment chamber gradually synchronized their pulses with Rex's, creating a more controlled and stable energy network. Lisa watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and frustration. "I don't understand. The protocol was supposed to allow total control over the mutations. How can he be operating independently?" "Because you never truly understood what we created, Lisa," said Ethan, his voice laden with newfound understanding. "The true potential of Project Evolution wasn't to create a new dominant species, but to develop a form of consciousness that could mediate natural evolution." Mark, who continued monitoring the data, noticed something surprising. The readings show that Rex is establishing a kind of symbiotic network between all the modified species. It's as if he's healing the ecosystem. Sarah approached the creature, observing how its protrusions now emitted a softer, more harmonic glow. "He's not a control tool. He's a guardian, a mediator between different forms of life." Lisa's face contorted in an expression of anguish. Her own genetic modifications seemed to be reacting to the energy field generated by Rex, visibly causing discomfort. "No, this can't be right. The power to control evolution should be ours." The laboratory had transformed into a silent battlefield between two opposing forces. Lisa's attempt to maintain control over the mutations and Rex's harmonizing effort to restore balance. The living walls pulsed with energy, reflecting this invisible struggle for the fate of evolution. "Don't you see?" shouted Lisa, her voice distorted by the pain of the transformations in her own body. "Without direct control over evolution, humanity is doomed. Climate change, habitat destruction. We need to have the power to adapt species to our will." Ethan approached his former colleague, his face showing more compassion than anger. "Lisa, look at yourself. The modifications you made to your body are destabilizing. You've become dependent on constant adjustments, just like the creatures you tried to control." Sarah observed the scene with growing understanding. The projections from Rex's device now showed a new set of data, a complete map of the genetic modifications made in the forest and their chain effects on the ecosystem. "Mark," called Sarah, "look at these patterns. The species that were modified more naturally, respecting their own rhythms of adaptation, are the most stable." The veterinarian nodded, analyzing the data. "It's like a delicate dance between different forms of life. When we try to force changes too quickly, we break the natural harmony of the system." Rex continued his silent work of stabilization, his protrusions emitting waves of energy that seemed to calm the more aggressive mutations. The lion remained by his side, like an ancestral guardian witnessing the birth of a new era in the history of evolution. Lisa staggered, leaning on one of the laboratory tables. Her genetic modifications were clearly coming into conflict with the harmonizing field created by Rex. I can't lose control now. I've worked so hard to get here." "Lisa," Ethan spoke softly, "you're not losing control. You're being liberated from it. The true power of evolution isn't in control, but in natural adaptation, in the balance between all forms of life." The organic screens in the laboratory began to display new data, showing how Rex's energy field was affecting not just the immediate environment, but expanding to the entire modified forest. It was like watching a healing process on an ecosystem scale. Sarah approached Rex, noticing how the device in his paws now seemed different, no longer a control tool, but an instrument of harmony. "He's teaching the modified species to find their own way back to balance." "It's extraordinary," murmured Mark, observing the data. "The mutations aren't being reversed, but realigned, as if each species was learning to use its new capabilities in a more natural way." Lisa, still struggling against the transformations in her body, stared fixedly at Rex. How does he manage to do this? The protocol was supposed to allow only controlled modifications." "Because Rex isn't using the protocol the way we imagined," explained Ethan. "He developed his own understanding of the evolutionary process. He's not trying to control evolution, he's facilitating a form of communication between different forms of life. The laboratory lights began to stabilize, and the equipment plants returned to a more natural state, although maintaining their enhanced capabilities. It was as if the entire facility was breathing in a new rhythm, more harmonious and sustainable. The harmonization process initiated by Rex continued to spread through the facility, affecting every living being that had been modified by the experiments. The living walls of the laboratory now pulsed in a softer rhythm, like a heart finding its natural beat after a prolonged arrhythmia. Lisa was sitting in a chair, her body trembling as it went through its own transformations. The genetic modifications she had made to herself were being realigned by Rex's energy field, a process that was both physical and psychological. "I just wanted to help," she murmured, her voice more human than it had been in months. "I thought we needed to be stronger, more adaptable." Sarah approached her former rival, offering a glass of water. "Sometimes our greatest strength lies in accepting our natural limitations," she said softly, "in working with nature, not against it." Ethan was busy at the control panels, monitoring the expansion of Rex's harmonizing field through the forest. "It's fascinating. The species aren't losing their adaptations. They're learning to use them in a way that's more integrated with the ecosystem." Dr. Mark, who was analyzing samples from the equipment plants, made a surprising discovery. "Look at this. The plants are maintaining their enhanced capabilities, but in a more organic way. It's as if they've found a middle ground between natural evolution and genetic modification." Rex moved through the laboratory with a serene presence, his device still emitting soft waves of stabilizing energy. The lion followed him closely, as if the two represented the meeting point between the natural and the modified world. "What exactly is Rex doing?" asked Sarah, observing how the creature's luminescent protrusions pulsed in increasingly complex patterns. "He's teaching," replied Ethan, amazed. "Not just stabilizing the mutations, but showing each organism how to find its own balance. It's a form of evolutionary consciousness that we never imagined possible." Lisa, still recovering, stared fixedly at her hands that were slowly returning to a more natural appearance, although retaining some of the enhanced capabilities. "All these years, I thought evolution always meant going beyond, always seeking more power. I never considered that it could be about finding harmony." The laboratory screens now showed a real-time map of the transformations occurring in the forest. Areas that were previously chaotic with uncontrolled mutations began to show signs of stabilization. The ecosystem was reorganizing itself, finding a new balance that incorporated both natural and modified elements. "It's as if Rex were creating a new form of symbiosis," observed Mark, fascinated with the data. "A way for different forms of life to coexist and mutually benefit from genetic modifications." Sarah noticed that Rex's device was projecting new symbols in the air, different from those she had seen before. "Ethan, can you interpret this?" "They're more than data," replied her brother, studying the projections. "They seem to be instructions, a new protocol for the responsible use of directed evolution technology." Lisa stood up slowly, her legs still shaky. All this time, the real breakthrough wasn't in controlling evolution, but in learning to work with it. She looked at her notes scattered around the laboratory, years of research based on a fundamentally mistaken premise. The lion, which had remained vigilant throughout the process, approached Lisa. To everyone's surprise, the animal gently touched her hand with its muzzle, as if recognizing and accepting her transformation. As night fell, the laboratory gradually transformed. The pulsating lights of the equipment plants had found a stable rhythm, creating an almost meditative atmosphere. The organic screens displayed data confirming the progressive stabilization of the entire modified ecosystem. "We need to document all of this," said Ethan, hastily organizing notes and samples. "What Rex has shown us today could revolutionize our understanding of evolution and adaptation." Sarah helped collect data, but her attention was divided between the scientific work and the remarkable transformation she observed in Lisa. The scientist, once consumed by the obsession of control, now observed her own body adapting with a mixture of humility and fascination. "It's amazing," murmured Lisa, flexing her fingers that still maintained some modified characteristics, but now in a more harmonious way. "I can feel every cell in my body finding its own balance. It's like Waking up from a feverish dream, Dr. Mark was busy cataloging the changes in forest species through the facility's sensors. The adaptations are remaining stable, but in a way that's more integrated with the ecosystem. It's as if each species had found its ideal niche between the natural and the modified. Rex continued his silent work, moving through the laboratory with deliberate grace. His luminescent protrusions now emitted a soft and constant glow, and the device in his paws periodically projected new datasets, a continuous record of the harmonization process. "Look at this," called Sarah, pointing to one of the screens. "The plants that develop data processing capabilities are maintaining this ability, but now in a way that benefits the entire ecosystem. They're creating a kind of natural communication network." Ethan nodded, studying the data. It's as if Rex had shown us an intermediate path, a way to use directed evolution technology without losing the connection to natural processes. Lisa approached one of the living walls of the laboratory, touching it gently. "All this time I thought we needed to transcend nature to survive. I never realized that true transcendence was in learning to work in harmony with it." The lion, which had become a constant presence beside Rex, demonstrated a subtle change in its behavior. Its movements were more fluid, more conscious, as if it too had been affected by the harmonizing field in a unique way. "The question now," said Mark, "is how to apply this knowledge responsibly. Climate change and habitat destruction are still real problems we need to face." Sarah observed how Rex reacted to this comment, his protrusions pulsing in a pattern that seemed to indicate understanding. The device began to project a new series of symbols in the air. Not just data, but what appeared to be a complete plan for the controlled and harmonious implementation of evolution technology. "That's it," exclaimed Ethan, his eyes shining with understanding. "Rex isn't just showing us how to correct our mistakes, he's teaching us how to move forward, a protocol that allows adaptive changes without losing the natural balance." Lisa, who had joined the group to observe the projections, spoke with a voice full of contained emotion. "The whole purpose of Project Evolution, it wasn't to create a new dominant species, nor to control nature. It was to develop a form of consciousness that could guide evolution in a responsible and harmonious way." Dawn began to insinuate itself through the laboratory windows, painting the environment with golden tones that mixed with the soft glow of the equipment plants. The night of transformations had left everyone exhausted, but with a new perspective on the future of Project Evolution. "We need to think about how to share this knowledge with the world," said Sarah, organizing the samples and data collected during the night, "but in a way that can't be misused." Ethan nodded, still analyzing the projections that Rex continued to provide. "The protocol that Rex developed is extraordinary. He created natural safeguards that prevent aggressive or unbalanced genetic modifications." Dr. Mark, who had spent the last few hours documenting the transformations in the forest species, approached with new data. "The changes are fascinating. The species have maintained their beneficial adaptations, but in a way that contributes to the entire ecosystem. It's as if they've found their natural role in a greater symphony." Lisa, now more stable after her own transformation, worked at one of the terminals, reorganizing years of research under a new light. "I was so focused on forcing evolution that I never realized the potential of gently guiding it. Rex showed us that true innovation lies in collaboration, not control." Rex himself had become the center of a remarkable phenomenon. His harmonizing field continued to expand through the forest, but now in a more subtle way, like a patient teacher guiding his students. The lion, his constant companion, seemed to have developed a deeper understanding of its role in this new order. "Look at this," called Sarah, pointing to one of the organic screens. "The plants that develop data processing capabilities are creating a natural communication network with other species. It's like a biological internet, sharing information about environmental conditions and ecosystem needs." Ethan approached to examine the data. "It's more than communication. It's a form of collective consciousness that respects the individuality of each species." Rex didn't just stabilize the mutations, he created a platform for collaborative evolution. Lisa, observing her reflection on one of the screens, noticed how her own modifications had integrated harmoniously with her natural biology. "Our modifications, they haven't completely disappeared. It's as if they found a way to coexist with our original nature." "Exactly," agreed Mark. "The enhanced capabilities remain, But now they function in harmony with the body's natural systems. It's the same principle we're seeing throughout the forest. Rex's device projected a new series of symbols in the air, more complex than the previous ones. Sarah and Ethan leaned over the projections, their eyes widening with understanding. "This is incredible," whispered Ethan. "Rex isn't just showing us how to use the technology, he's teaching us how to evolve it. A path to develop genetic modification tools that work in partnership with nature." Sarah realized they were facing something much bigger than a simple correction of scientific errors. It's a complete paradigm shift. Instead of trying to control evolution, we can create conditions for it to flourish naturally, even in challenging environments. Lisa joined the discussion, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Think of the applications. We could help species adapt to climate changes without compromising their natural essence. Restore damaged ecosystems in a way that respects their intrinsic processes." The lion, which observed the conversation with an almost human attention, approached Rex. The creature's luminescent protrusions pulsed in a pattern that seemed to respond to the feline's presence, as if demonstrating that even the most advanced forms of evolution could still connect deeply with nature in its purest state. The sun was already high in the sky when the team finally began to discuss the next steps. The forest surrounding the laboratory had transformed into something unique, no longer a chaotic environment of uncontrolled mutations, but a harmonious ecosystem where the natural and the modified coexisted in balance. "We need to establish clear guidelines for the use of this technology," said Ethan, organizing the notes and protocols they had developed during the night. "What Rex has shown us is too powerful to be used without responsibility," Sarah agreed, observing how the equipment plants now functioned in perfect harmony with the environment. "It's fascinating how each species has found its own way to integrate the modifications. No two adaptations are exactly alike." Dr. Mark was particularly interested in the implications for veterinary medicine. "Imagine the possibilities for treating genetic diseases in animals. We could facilitate natural adaptations without causing imbalances in the organism." Lisa, who had spent the last few hours reorganizing her previous work under a new perspective, looked up from her records. "All my previous work, it was based on the wrong premise. I thought we needed to control evolution, when in fact we needed to learn to dance with it." Rex continued his silent work of harmonization, but now in a different way. Instead of imposing changes, the creature seemed to be teaching each organism to find its own evolutionary path. The lion, always close, had become a living example of how even unmodified species could benefit from this new understanding of life. "Look at this," called Sarah, pointing to one of the organic screens. "The plants are developing new growth patterns. It's as if they're learning to optimize their resources naturally, without needing forced modifications." Ethan approached to examine the data. "It's like a form of evolution, guided by the collective wisdom of the ecosystem. Each species contributes to the balance of the whole, while maintaining its own identity." Lisa, now more centered after her transformation, shared an observation. "It's interesting how my own modifications have stabilized. I can still feel the enhanced capabilities, but now they work in harmony with my body, not against it." "It's the fundamental principle that Rex showed us," commented Mark. "Evolution doesn't need to be a battle. It can be a collaborative dance between different forms of life." Rex's device projected a new series of data in the air, showing how the harmonizing field had expanded beyond the limits of the facility. The forest was becoming a living model of how technology and nature could work together. "We need to think about how to share this knowledge," said Sarah. "Not just with the scientific community, but with the whole world. It's a new way of thinking about our relationship with nature." Ethan nodded, but his expression was cautious. "Yes, but we need to do this gradually, with wisdom. The world needs to understand that this isn't a tool of power, but a path to coexistence." Lisa, who had personally experienced the dangers of irresponsible use of technology, added, "Maybe we can start with controlled pilot projects. Areas where climate change is causing severe damage to ecosystems." The lion, which had remained close to Rex throughout the discussion, demonstrated a notable change in its behavior. Its presence was no longer just that of a guardian, but of an active participant in the new balance being established. A week passed since the night of transformations in the laboratory. The facility, once a center of controversial genetic experiments, had become a model of collaborative research between science and nature. Rex's harmonizing field had stabilized, creating a zone where natural evolution and genetic modifications coexisted peacefully. Sarah and Ethan worked tirelessly to document all the changes and establish safe protocols for the use of the technology. The living walls of the laboratory, now functioning in perfect harmony with the equipment, provided a constant flow of data about the new balance of the ecosystem. "It's amazing how the species are adapting," commented Sarah, observing through one of the windows as a group of modified birds interacted harmoniously with their natural counterparts. Each day brings a new discovery about how evolution can be guided without being forced. Dr. Mark had established a specific observation area to study the behavior of different species. The most fascinating thing is how knowledge seems to be naturally shared among organisms. It's as if Rex had initiated a chain reaction of evolutionary learning. Lisa, who had decided to remain at the facility to assist with the research, was different from the obsessive scientist she used to be. Her own modifications had found a balance, allowing her to maintain some enhanced capabilities without compromising her humanity. "I found something interesting in the old data," she said, approaching with an organic screen. "It seems there were always signs of this harmonization potential in the early experiments. We were so focused on controlling the process that we never noticed them." Rex continued to be a constant presence in the laboratory, but his role had evolved. The creature now seemed more like a teacher than an experiment, guiding both the modified organisms and the researchers towards a deeper understanding of evolution. The lion, which had become inseparable from Rex, demonstrated an increasingly refined intelligence. It wasn't an artificial or forced intelligence, but a natural awakening of latent capabilities, catalyzed by the presence of the harmonizing field. "I received news from the ethics committee," announced Ethan, entering the main room with a tablet. "They approved our proposal to establish ecological restoration zones using the new protocol. With some conditions, of course." Sarah smiled, remembering the chaotic night at Central Hospital that had started this whole journey. Who could have imagined that storm would bring us here? That a mysterious creature would teach us so much about balance and adaptation? "The question now," pondered Mark, "is how to expand this knowledge responsibly. There are so many ecosystems at risk, so many species needing help to adapt to climate changes." Lisa, who was analyzing the most recent data from the harmonizing field, made a surprising observation. "Look at this, the protocol that Rex developed. It automatically adapts to the specific needs of each environment. It's not a one-size-fits-all system, but a guide that respects the particularities of each ecosystem." Ethan approached to examine the data. It's as if he had created a form of distributed ecological intelligence. Each organism contributes to the balance of the whole, while maintaining its own autonomy. Sarah observed how Rex's luminescent protrusions pulsed softly, creating patterns that seemed to respond to the team's discoveries. The device in his paws was no longer just a genetic modification tool, but a channel of communication between different forms of life. "I think I finally understood," said Lisa, her voice laden with emotion. "The true purpose of Project Evolution was never to create something new, but to awaken something that was always present, the capacity of life to find its own path to balance." The sun was setting over the transformed forest, painting the sky with colors that seemed even more vibrant through the canopy of modified trees. In the laboratory, the team gathered for a final work session before starting the new phase of the project. "The first results from small-scale tests are promising," reported Sarah, projecting graphs on the organic screens. "The areas treated with the new protocol show remarkable recovery, and most importantly, the changes are stable and self-sustaining." Ethan, who had spent the last few days refining the safety protocols, added, "The most impressive thing is how each ecosystem develops its own adaptation pattern. We're no longer imposing changes, just facilitating the natural process of evolution." Doctor Mark was particularly excited about the implications for species conservation. "We already have requests from wildlife sanctuaries from all over the world. They see this as a real hope for species struggling to adapt to climate changes." Lisa, who had become an important voice in the discussion on ethics in genetic modification, observed Rex with a new look of understanding. "He showed us that true evolution isn't about power or control, but about finding harmony amid change." The device that Rex carried had become more than a tool. It was a symbol of a new era in the relationship between technology and nature. Its projections now served as a guide for other scientists, showing how to work with natural processes instead of trying to dominate them. "Look at this," called Sarah, pointing to one of the screens monitoring the forest. "The equipment plants are reproducing naturally, but their descendants maintain only the modifications that are beneficial to the entire ecosystem. It's as if there was a natural wisdom guiding the process." The lion, which had become an unofficial ambassador between the natural and modified world, demonstrated behavior that intrigued the researchers. Its presence seemed to facilitate the acceptance of changes by other species, as if it were a living bridge between different forms of life. "I received an interesting message today," commented Ethan. "The World Health Organization is interested in studying the implications of the protocol for regenerative medicine. They see potential for treatments that work with the body instead of just fighting diseases." Lisa, who knew well the dangers of going too far with genetic modifications, offered a unique perspective. "The important thing is to maintain balance. Use technology to heal and restore, not to try to transcend our fundamental nature." Sarah observed how Rex's luminescent protrusions pulsed in a soft, almost meditative pattern. "I think that was the most important lesson we learned. Evolution isn't a race to become stronger or more adapted. It's a delicate dance between all forms of life." Mark, who was finalizing his reports for the day, added, "And the most incredible thing is that each new day brings us discoveries about how this dance works. It's as if we were just beginning to understand the possibilities." The group observed through the window as the forest prepared for the night. The bioluminescent plants began to glow softly, creating a light show that was both natural and extraordinary. It was a constant reminder of how beauty could emerge when science and nature worked in harmony. "Tomorrow we begin preparations for the first large-scale restoration project," reminded Ethan. "But this time, we're going to do it the right way, with patience, respect, and humility in the face of nature's wisdom." A month passed since the stormy night in Chicago that changed everything. Central Hospital looked exactly the same from the outside, but Sarah knew the world had profoundly changed. She was back for one last visit before fully dedicating herself to the new project in the forest. "It's still strange to think how it all started here," she commented to Dr. Mark, who accompanied her through the familiar corridors. The veterinarian had become an invaluable partner in the project, his experience with animals providing unique insights into how to implement changes in a non-invasive way. "Sometimes I wonder if Rex knew exactly what he was doing when he chose us that night," replied Mark, smiling as he remembered the moment when the creature and the lion entered through the hospital doors. The quarantine section where it all began was silent now. Sarah paused there for a moment, recalling the fear and confusion of that first night. How could she have imagined that that moment of chaos would lead her to reunite with her brother and discover a new path for science? Back in the forest, work continued at a steady but careful pace. The laboratory had transformed into a collaborative research center, where scientists from around the world came to learn about the new protocol of harmonious evolution. Lisa, fully recovered from her extreme modifications, had become one of the leading voices in genetic research ethics. Rex remained a constant presence, but his role had evolved. The creature now acted as a guide, helping other scientists understand the delicate dance between technology and nature. The lion, always by his side, symbolized the bridge between the natural and modified world. "It's fascinating to see how things have developed," commented Ethan, who now led the project alongside Sarah. "We started trying to control evolution and ended up learning to be its dance partners." Rex's original device had become a model for a new generation of scientific tools, not to control nature, but to work in harmony with it. The holographic projections that once seemed mysterious now served as a living manual for responsible ecological restoration. "Each new day brings a different discovery," observed Sarah, looking through the laboratory windows at the vibrant forest. "It's as if each species had its own story to tell, its own path to finding balance." The forest had become a living example of how technology and nature could coexist in harmony. The equipment plants, now perfectly integrated into the ecosystem, provided valuable data on environmental conditions without disturbing the natural balance. The animals, both modified and natural, had found their own niches in this new environment. Lisa, who now spent more time in the field documenting the transformations, had developed a new appreciation for the subtlety of natural evolution. Each adaptation, each small change has its own time and purpose, she often said. Our task is not to rush the process, but to understand it and support it. The sun began to set over the forest, creating a spectacle of light through the bioluminescent leaves. Rex and the lion observed the horizon side by side, their silhouettes outlined against the colorful sky. It was an image that perfectly captured the essence of what they had achieved, a harmonious union between the extraordinary and the natural. "You know," said Sarah, observing the scene, "I think I finally understood what Rex came to teach us. It wasn't about creating something new, but about rediscovering something that had always been there, life's ability to find its own path to balance." And so, as night fell over the transformed forest, the cycle was complete. What began as a quest to control evolution had transformed into a journey of discovery and humility in the face of life's mysteries. True evolution, they had learned, was not about transcending nature, but about dancing in harmony with it. In the months that followed, the impact of Project Evolution began to spread far beyond the boundaries of the experimental forest. Scientific communities around the world were buzzing with excitement and cautious optimism about the possibilities this new understanding of evolution could bring. Sarah found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker at conferences and symposiums. She always made sure to emphasize that the project wasn't about controlling nature, but about learning to work alongside it. "We're not playing God," she would often say. "We're learning to be better stewards of the incredible complexity that already exists." Ethan, meanwhile, focused on refining the protocols and safeguards that would ensure the responsible use of the technology. He worked closely with international ethics committees to develop a framework that would prevent misuse while allowing for beneficial applications. "The challenge," he explained during one particularly heated debate, "is to find the balance between innovation and caution. We have a tool that could help countless species adapt to our rapidly changing world, but we must use it wisely." Dr. Mark's veterinary expertise proved invaluable as they began to explore applications for endangered species. He led a team that was developing ways to use the harmonizing field to help animals adapt to shrinking habitats and changing climates without losing their essential nature. "It's not about creating super animals," he would explain to his colleagues. "It's about giving species the tools they need to survive in a world we've altered. We're trying to undo some of the damage we've done." Lisa, once driven by the desire to control evolution, now found herself advocating for a more holistic approach to science. She traveled to universities and research institutions, sharing her experiences and warning against the dangers of hubris in scientific endeavors. "I stand before you as a cautionary tale," she would begin her lectures. "I thought I could master nature, bend it to my will. What I learned is that true mastery comes from partnership, from deep listening and respect for the intricate dance of life." As for Rex, the creature continued to surprise and amaze. It became clear that he was more than just a successful experiment. He was a bridge between the world of human understanding and the vast, often mysterious realm of nature. Researchers noticed that other animals, even those not part of the original experiments, seemed drawn to Rex. They would approach him without fear, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. The lion, Rex's constant companion, had also undergone a transformation. While still very much a wild animal, it displayed an uncanny intelligence and seemed to act as a kind of interpreter between Rex and the natural world. Researchers observed it communicating complex ideas to other animals through a sophisticated system of body language and vocalizations. One particularly memorable incident occurred when a group of endangered tigers was introduced to the edge of the experimental forest. The big cats, initially aggressive and disoriented, calmed almost immediately in Rex's presence. Over the following weeks, observers watched in awe as the tigers began to display new behaviors that allowed them to thrive in their changed environment, all without losing their essential tigerness. "It's as if Rex is teaching them how to unlock hidden potentials within their own genetic code," Sarah marveled as she reviewed the footage. "He's not changing them. He's showing them how to change themselves." The implications of this discovery were staggering. It suggested that all living things might have far greater capacity for adaptation than previously thought, if only they could be taught how to access it. As news of the project's success spread, the team found themselves facing new challenges. Governments and corporations began to take interest, some seeing the potential for ecological restoration, others eyeing possible military or economic applications. "We need to be very careful about who we share this knowledge with," Ethan warned during a team meeting. In the wrong hands, this technology could be devastating. The team agreed to implement a strict vetting process for any organization wanting to use the harmonizing field technology. They also decided to open source much of their basic research, believing that transparency was the best safeguard against misuse. "If everyone can see what we're doing," Sarah argued, "it's harder for anyone to twist it into something dangerous." As the project expanded, they began to see unexpected benefits. The harmonizing field seemed to have a calming effect on the entire ecosystem, reducing conflict between species and promoting a kind of ecological cooperation that scientists had never seen before. Plant species that had been on the brink of extinction began to flourish, developing new traits that allowed them to thrive in changed conditions. Insects vital to pollination evolved to better withstand pesticides while remaining harmless to crops. Even soil bacteria showed signs of adaptation, becoming more efficient at carbon sequestration and nitrogen fixation. "It's like the entire ecosystem is waking up," Dr. Mark observed, "becoming more resilient, more adaptable, but in a way that promotes balance rather than competition." The changes weren't limited to the natural world. People who spent time in or near the experimental zones reported feeling calmer, more focused and more connected to the world around them. Early studies suggested that exposure to the harmonizing field might have benefits for mental health, particularly for conditions like anxiety and depression. "It's as if being in the presence of this harmony reminds our bodies how to find their own balance," one research participant reported. This discovery led to a new branch of study, exploring the potential therapeutic applications of the technology. Hospitals began setting up small harmonic gardens, using plants developed in the project to create healing spaces for patients. The team also found themselves grappling with philosophical questions they had never anticipated. If all life had this hidden potential for adaptation and harmony, what did that mean for our understanding of consciousness, of free will, of the very nature of life itself? "We've opened a door," Ethan mused one evening, as the team sat watching the sun set over their transformed forest. "But I think we've only begun to glimpse what's on the other side." Sarah nodded, absently stroking the lion's mane as the big cat lounged near her feet. "I keep thinking about that night in the hospital," she said. "How afraid we were when Rex and this big guy showed up, and now look at us." Lisa, who had been quietly sketching in a notebook, looked up. "It's ironic," she said. "I spent years trying to control evolution, to force it to move faster. But what Rex showed us is that evolution has always been incredibly fast and adaptable. We just couldn't see it because we were looking at it the wrong way." Dr. Mark chuckled. "I remember in vet school they taught us that evolution was this slow, plodding process. Survival of the fittest, random mutations, that sort of thing. But now I think of it more like a conversation, a constant back and forth between organisms and their environment." "A dance," Sarah said softly. "That's what you called it before, Ethan. A dance." Ethan nodded, his eyes on Rex, who was sitting at the edge of the clearing, his luminescent protrusions pulsing gently in the twilight. "A dance that's been going on for billions of years, and we've finally been invited to join in." As night fell and the forest came alive with bioluminescence, the team fell into a comfortable silence. Each of them was lost in thought, contemplating the journey that had brought them here and the uncertain but exciting path that lay ahead. They had set out to control evolution and instead had learned to listen to it, to work with it, rather than against it. In doing so, they had not only transformed the world around them, but had been transformed themselves. The once sterile laboratory now felt like a living, breathing part of the forest. The lines between technology and nature, between the modified and the wild, had blurred. And in that blurring, they had found something profound, a new way of seeing the world, of understanding humanity's place within the vast tapestry of life. As stars began to twinkle overhead, Sarah found herself filled with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. The challenges facing the world, climate change, habitat destruction, the loss of biodiversity, were still immense. But for the first time, she felt they had a tool that could genuinely help, not by dominating nature, but by amplifying its own incredible resilience. "I think," she said slowly, breaking the silence, "that we need to share this more widely. Not just the scientific findings, but the philosophy of it. The way it changes how you see the world." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean go public, beyond the scientific community?" Sarah nodded. "I've been thinking about it for a while. The technology, the specific protocols, yes, we need to be careful with those, but the underlying idea, the understanding that we're part of this incredible adaptive system, I think that could change everything." Lisa leaned forward, her eyes shining with interest. "A paradigm shift in how humans see their relationship with nature. It's not a bad idea. If people understood what we've learned here, it could change the way we approach everything from conservation to urban planning. Not to mention healthcare," Dr. Mark added. "The implications for medicine alone are staggering." Ethan looked thoughtful. "It's a big step. Once we put this out there, we can't take it back. Are we ready for the responsibility that comes with that?" There was a moment of silence as they all considered the weight of the decision. Then a soft chirping sound drew their attention. Rex had approached the group, the device in his paws glowing softly. As they watched, it projected a series of images into the air. Scenes from around the world showing ecosystems in distress, species on the brink of extinction, habitats being destroyed. But then the images began to shift, showing how these same environments could be transformed using the principles they had discovered. Deserts blooming, coral reefs regenerating, forests regrowing with incredible speed and resilience. The message was clear. The world needed what they had learned. Sarah stood up, feeling a sense of purpose settle over her. "I think," she said, looking around at her colleagues, at the transformed forest, at Rex and the lion, "that it's time for the next phase of evolution. Not just for plants and animals, but for ideas, for the way we think about our place in the world." One by one, the others nodded in agreement. They had started this journey in fear and confusion, driven by the desire to control. They would continue it with hope and wonder, guided by the desire to connect, to understand, to harmonize. As if in response to their decision, the forest around them seemed to pulse with life. Bioluminescent plants glowed brighter, night birds sang in complex harmonies, and a warm breeze carried the scent of vibrant, healthy growth. In that moment, surrounded by the tangible results of their work and the promise of what was to come, the team felt a profound sense of connection to each other, to the forest, to the intricate web of life that spanned the globe. They had set out to change the world and had ended up changing themselves. And in doing so, they had opened the door to a future where humanity could finally find its place in the great dance of life. As they began to discuss their plans for sharing their discoveries with the world, Rex and the lion settled nearby, silent guardians of a new era of understanding between humans and nature. The night deepened around them, full of possibility and alive with the gentle pulse of evolution, continuing its eternal dance under the starry sky.